I started Eat, Breathe, Thrive 5 years ago, and I was just out of university where I'd studied neuroscience, and I was volunteer teaching what I called a yoga for eating disorders program. I decided I wanted to do it full time for my life. And I was a very ambitious 22-year-old, so I decided that I would do a Kickstarter campaign to raise $50,000 in 50 days. 45 days into the campaign, I had about $18,000 raised, which is a lot of money, but not nearly enough to start a nonprofit organization or do a research study, which is what I wanted to do. I remember I called a friend up and I was panicking and I was like, there are 5 days left in the campaign. I've only got $18,000. I'm failing. What do I do? And he said, Chelsea, what would your heroes do? Like, think about your heroes in history. What would they do? And I was like, okay, Gandhi, what would Gandhi do? And I was like, I could do a hunger strike. And my friend was like, you're not doing a hunger strike. It's not really in alignment with your mission. So he instead suggested I do a yoga strike, which initially I thought was ridiculous. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, he might actually be onto something. So I found a very prominent building on Main Street in Santa Monica, California, and I went to the building owner and I said, do you mind if I lay a yoga mat down on your roof for a few days and live up there? Yeah, I don't know why he said yes, but he did. So I climbed up on a roof and I laid a yoga mat down and I took a vow not to get off that yoga mat until I had raised $50,000. So I lived up there for 5 days and people would send food up, local restaurants would send food up, and we had a live stream camera far before Facebook Live that would record the whole thing. But 5 days in, I had generated enough media interest and enough buzz to raise $50,000. And that's how Eat, Breathe, Thrive was started. So the mission of Eat, Breathe, Thrive is to prevent and help individuals overcome eating disorders through yoga-based programs. And I always struggle with that word overcome because it implies that like you get over it and it's no longer there. I could use the word integrate, I could use the word recover, I could use the word transcend, and none of them really get to it. Eat, Breathe, Thrive is all about giving people the tools and resources they need to not just deal with a very severe mental health issue, but come out of that a happier, a healthier, thriving individual. We don't want to just see people get better from their illness, but we want to see people come back to life and really enjoy and find meaning and connection in their life. We do that by combining yoga with a support group format, and then we also get people engaged in their local community in volunteer work, because we find that mental illness can very much isolate you to yourself, and so having an opportunity to get out and serve someone else can be really useful. So we found yoga to be an absolute game changer for people with eating disorders, and really for most people dealing with any type of mental health issue in life. Oh gosh, there are so many things that I want yoga teachers to know about eating disorders, and enough of them that I decided to make a course about it rather than just writing a 5 things you need to know article. Probably the most important thing that yoga teachers need to know about eating disorders is that they have serious medical consequences that can put someone at risk of dying. Eating disorders actually have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness for this reason. And related to that, just because someone is at or above a healthy weight does not mean they're not at risk for these medical complications. So I've had multiple students who have been at or above a healthy weight and engaging in purging, so vomiting or over-exercising, and as a result of those behaviors, had a heart attack and died. So it's a really serious illness that I think sometimes in the yoga community, we might hear that somebody's been juice fasting for 2 weeks and they might be a bit thin, and we're like, oh, well, she's just really attached to her practice. The thing somebody said to me the other night, and this blew my mind, was he was talking about his girlfriend, and he said, well, my girlfriend, does have a bulimia, and she does make herself throw up every once in a while, but, I have a couple of beers at night, and it's just her way of coping. And what I said to him is, that's not the same. That's making yourself throw up is like having a handle of vodka at night, if not more. Like, it does serious issues that can cause a heart attack quite suddenly. And all of that may sound really alarmist, but the big thing I would want yoga teachers to know, and that you can learn in this course, is that these things have an effect on the entire body. And while yoga can be a tremendously valuable tool in recovery, it can also, if not used wisely and not used at the appropriate time in one's recovery journey, it can also put people at serious risk of not just medical consequences, but death. So a few years ago, I coined this term, the double-edged sword of yoga for eating disorders. And I actually used it because I was going into treatment centers and getting pushback on, like, is this yoga thing really useful? Because what if people abuse it? So in a nutshell, the double-edged sword is this idea that on one hand, yoga can be tremendously helpful for people dealing with food and body image issues of any kind, including eating disorders. But on the other hand, yoga can be a convenient mask for disordered eating behaviors, and yoga can be a way of acting out in dangerous weight control behaviors, and it can exacerbate the eating disorder itself. The greatest myth I see percolating about eating disorders is the idea that it's a wealthy white girl, skinny person issue. Eating disorders affect people from all walks of life. One thing I would point out here is that one of the reasons we think it's a wealthy white girl issue is those are typically the people who show up for treatment, especially in the United States, and they're the people that get counted in the research study. The other thing I'll mention here is most people assume that people with eating disorders are underweight. And in reality, the majority of people with eating disorders are at or above a healthy weight and are at just as much risk for serious medical complications as people with anorexia and people with a lower BMI. So I would say the biggest myth is just that eating disorders look like an emaciated young girl, and that's not what they look like. What is the yoga teacher's role in supporting students with eating disorders? This is the big question. The first thing I would say is that the yoga teacher's role is not to diagnose the person with an eating disorder, and it's not to treat the person with an eating disorder. So often people with eating disorders come to yoga looking to use it as a replacement for treatment. And in that way, the yoga teacher can sometimes do more harm than good by trying to fix or change the person and allowing them to come to yoga instead of going to psychotherapy or instead of getting into traditional treatment. So that leaves us with the question, if it's not diagnosis and it's not treatment, what is the yoga teacher's role? And I would say that varies from relationship to relationship, and it varies based on where a person is in recovery. So at some points in recovery, the yoga teacher's role might be nothing more than being a friend and a mentor with appropriate boundaries. And further on in recovery, the yoga teacher's role might be to offer practices that, when used in conjunction with traditional forms of treatment, might help the person eat more mindfully, connect with their bodies, feel hunger and feel fullness. The yoga teacher's role might be to provide practices that could help with dealing with anxiety and isn't necessarily going to cure those things, but might be helpful in complement. And most of all, I think the yoga teacher's role is as a support person amongst a treatment team of professionals. So alongside a therapist, alongside a psychiatrist, alongside a dietitian, nutritionist, and any other treatment professionals that person has involved. So often if I go to a party and I tell people what I do, I run a nonprofit that helps people with eating disorders through yoga, I immediately get lots of stories and I immediately get lots of questions. And one of the questions I get most often is, I have a student who I'm seriously concerned about, and when she walks into class, I absolutely freeze and I don't know what to do. I don't know her well, I don't know whether to approach her, or this happens, in the grocery store or in schools. So there's somebody that clearly is saying with their body, I need help, I'm struggling, I have an eating disorder, and the people around them see it and don't know what to do. It's complex. It's really hard when you've got somebody who's clearly saying with their body, I'm struggling, I need help, I'm dealing with an eating disorder and I'm wearing it, so there's no escaping it. It's hard for a caring person to see that and then also be aware of the complexity of approaching a stranger about something so intimate and to know what to do. The first thing I would say is that as public as eating disorders are on the body, they're enwrapped in a lot of shame and secrecy and vulnerability beneath all of that. So just walking up to a stranger in a grocery store may backfire because the person may immediately be put on guard and feel like either you're trying to steal their teddy bear or you've seen something about them that they feel deeply insecure about. I think that really, it's best to have these kinds of conversations when there's relationship established. So when I've had this happen in my local community and the person is a stranger to me, I often start to look at who's closest to that person. Are there friends or family members connected to them that might be in a better place to have this conversation? And of course, in this course, we talk about a 5-step process that yoga teachers can use to approach someone, especially when safety is an issue. So if you're teaching a hot or a vigorous yoga class and you have somebody come in who may be at risk of fainting or having a heart attack in your class, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to build rapport and relationship, and you've got to have a hard conversation right then.